Hi guys, welcome back to Thoroughly Enjoyed Books and another episode of Books Bout Bipolar at long last. Today I'm joined with Paige from Pages with Paige, who I will hand over to in a minute to introduce herself, but I just want to address a couple of things before I do. First of all, sorry there was no March live show because I just didn't do the reading, which almost happened this month as well, I'll be honest. But basically, March ended up just being a horrible, horrible month. And the book that I had already lined up for March was also a horrible, horrible book that I just didn't feel like reading. So we've skipped that month, but now we're back on track. I have just posted the books for May, June, July, and August on my channel as well. So go and check that out. We'll get everything back up and running. And after many cancellations and rearrangements and figuring out that Australia is just really awkward to align times with, finally I've got Paige with us. And we're talking about An Unquiet Mind by Kay Redfield Jamison, which is a memoir, which I will go into in a little bit. But first of all, Paige, tell us about yourself and your channel, and then I'll ask you the questions I have for you.
Hello, so I'm Paige from Pages with Paige. I'm a pretty new booktuber. I've only been doing this a year, but I make lots of random content. I have a TBR game where my partner and I play Twister to decide our reads, and it's chaos. So yeah, my brand's just chaotic energy, so I hope you enjoy.
Chaotic fun energy.
Yes, usually.
So I've got a few questions for you, Paige, about what did you know about bipolar disorder before joining the book club?
So I can't say I had much knowledge. I knew that it dealt with having manic episodes and then depressive episodes. I haven't had any real experience with it in my personal life. I suffer from anxiety and depression, so I was curious to see how the sort of emotional roller coaster goes with those, because there are times when I feel that my depression sort of hits towards a manic when I'm coming out of it. And I got misdiagnosed many years ago to potentially be screened for bipolar before going on antidepressants. So it's sort of been something that I'm really interested in because it was something that was starting to hit close to home. But then, so I don't have a lot of theoretical knowledge behind it, but it's definitely interested in it.
And why did you pick this book to join the live show for? Was there a reason? No.
Yes and no. I just wanted to be a part because I wanted to learn more. And then An Unquiet Mind seemed like a really good fit for learning a non-fictional take on it. And then I know you had Marbles as well, which was also that memoir. But yeah, it was just like, oh, cool. Okay. Bit of non-fiction, dip my toes into that again, get to see some real life experiences and go from there. So yeah, it wasn't too much of a reason, but a little bit.
So as normal, I will just give some trigger warnings for this book. Obviously, it's about bipolar disorder. It is about Kay Redfield Jamison's experience with bipolar disorder, particularly as a expert in psychology. She is a professor. I have forgotten at which university she's at the minute, and the book was written 20 years ago, so it's probably not relevant now. But she had a doctorate in psychology and did actually end up specialising in manic depression, which she prefers to use instead of bipolar, which is something we will discuss later on. The reason that I picked this for the book club is because it is one of those seminal texts of bipolar. It's one of those that when you're first diagnosed with bipolar, or at least when I was diagnosed with bipolar, and I know a lot of other people who were diagnosed, are told to read this book. It will give you an insight as to what it's like, as merging that experience with that science knowledge. And I have a lot of thoughts about the book, which we'll get into. And in terms of trigger warnings, I think it just comes with all the usual bipolar warnings. You know, it talks about depression, it talks about suicidal ideation. This one does talk about attempts, although not in graphic detail. It's kind of more just mentioned. I would say there is some stigmatizing language used, again, which we will get onto. So if you don't like to be, you know, the words crazy and insane when referring to mental health, there is quite a bit of that in this book. And there is death, non-suicidal death as well. I can't think if there was anything else in this one in particular. Can you?
No.
No, I can't think of anything. But yeah, just, you know, be cautious of those things going into it. So I've just having a little look at the Google Docs. So those are our introductions. Let's get on then, before we get on to the discussion, let's go on to the review. What did you think of it?
I really enjoyed it. Not coming from being an Own Voices reviewer, I found that Kay's writing was really articulate, and I felt that it was spoken from such an interesting combination of her own experiences, but also her science background. Like her writing, just I was there in it. So I find it really difficult to rate memoirs lower than a 5 because it's someone's experiences, and I feel like I'd be cheating them to say anything less because this is their experience. With the writing style, like obviously you could take it down notches for that sort of thing, and then if there was no like content you actually enjoyed, I could understand lowering it for that. But since that wasn't necessarily my experience, I was like, I'll give it a 5 because I was sucked in, like, oh.
I don't really rate books anyway with star ratings. Like I do when I document it on like Sorograph or Goodreads. But in general, I don't, and I haven't rated this one yet. And again, I think it's like you said, for the same reasons. It's a memoir, it's somebody's life, and it's it is very factual a lot of the time. A lot of the things that she mentions are true. I might disagree with some of it, having, you know, lived with bipolar
100%.
whole life. Like some of it I listen to and go, is that actually true though? But you know, apparently scientifically it is, so I can't disagree there. The one thing I did have with it is I felt it was inconsistent in its writing style, because it was that blend of experience, memoir, and science. Sometimes I felt she went into like really flowery creative writing that kind of took me out of it a bit, and I was like, what are you trying to do? What do you want to do here? Which kind of took me off my train of thought. But other than that, I enjoyed it. I think it is a really good look at bipolar disorder. I think she lives with bipolar 1, which isn't the type of bipolar that I have. It is the type of bipolar that my parent has. Again, we'll get into it. We've got a conversation about family and the impact it has on that later on. But I preferred it to Marbles. I came out of it less conflicted to Marbles, because I think the issues I had with that book were brought up in this one, but the way they were discussed was completely different, and I preferred it. It was less opinionated and more factual. So it was a nice blend, I think, and I really enjoyed it. So let's get into some discussion then. So I sent Paige a Google Doc beforehand, just saying these are the things I want to mention, and then asked if there was anything she wanted to add as well. And we both came up with this being the main thing to discuss, I think, is the thoughts on the terminology used in the book. How did you feel without knowing anything really about bipolar or the experience?
So I felt like at first I was really confronted, because I just know that's not the kind of language that is supportive. And so for an expert in her field to being like, yeah, I was crazy, like absolutely off my rocker. I was just like, you're so blasé about it. But this isn't like how I.
Yeah. So contextually for people watching, the first thing isn't problematic, isn't stigmatizing at all. I don't think there's a problem with it. Is that Kay Redfield Jamison does prefer to use the term manic depressive rather than bipolar. And I think it was around the 90s that the terminology changed. And I think she says that she was diagnosed in the 70s or 80s, around that time, when the term manic depressive was more common. And she, being an expert in the field, has maintained that as her preference, because she feels it more accurately describes the ups and the downs, and shows that polar, I can't say that word, polarity,
Yes.
better than the word bipolar does, which I don't necessarily agree, but I think that's a personal choice thing. So that was fine. But she does refer to her episodes as her being insane and being psychotic. And there are periods where psychotic is a medical term. You know, there are times where psychotic and psychosis are a particular experience. So that was fine. But I just felt, having been called a psycho so many times and being told I was insane and feeling insane, her saying it did knock me back a little bit, for the reasons that I think you said as well. She was so blasé about it. What effect do you think that had on you?
It was definitely like one where I'm like, consciously, I know that I could never use that to describe someone. Mm-hmm. But if that's how she views herself and she has reclaimed her ownership, I'm going to go along with it. Mm-hmm. Because if if she feels comfortable in that experience, whilst I'm not going to use it to anyone else, I'm uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, but I can appreciate that she's probably worked through that and gone, okay, well, clinically, I was having a psychotic episode. I'm crazy and I'm okay. I'm living through it. Every day I exist. I continue to be these things, but I take ownership in it. So, yeah, I was like, I can't imagine it, like, if this is what you get recommended when you first get diagnosed, though, that would be hell.
Yeah. And I think that's the problem I had with it, because you hit on the thing when you were describing it. You know, you said a psychotic episode. She doesn't refer to it as a psychotic episode.
She refers to it as,
being psychotic. She said, I was psychotic. I was insane. So that is the language that she uses. And I think, you know, I'm very grateful that I didn't read it 7 years ago, because when I was first diagnosed, I was completely in denial. I've mentioned it before on other shows. Like, I just was like, nope, don't want to be crazy. Where, like you said, she's kind of has reclaimed that. But I do wonder what impact that has on other people who are reading it. You know, I kind of knew going to my doctor what they were going to say. I kind of had a feeling maybe I'm bipolar because I had a parent who was bipolar. But if, you know, I was so in denial about it because I knew how bad things could get. So reading that and not wanting to be crazy, not wanting to be insane, and having somebody say, you are insane, would have been even harder, I think. Would have been even harder. But I think that takes us on nicely to something else that she mentioned in the book, which was about denial and treatment. So she talks a little bit in it about how most people, or a lot of people with bipolar disorder, will be in denial and refuse to take medication. How, I mean, you've said you've had your anxiety and depression. I don't know if you've ever been on medication for it at all, but what did you think reading her talk about treatment and medication into that term?
in respect to my own experiences, I am very hesitant to go on medication. I know that antidepressants can be a journey to find the ones that suit you best. And with my little incident, I was going to a research center to talk through, they were trying to do a study on the symptoms of depression and then the symptoms of bipolar depressive episodes to sort of be able to make a better criteria between the two, I suppose. And this girl goes to me at the end of it and she's like, oh, if you ever want to go on antidepressants, I'd just get screened for bipolar first, just to make sure. And it was like, okay, cool. I'm not questioning my entire existence now.
I mean, I'm glad that somebody did say that to you, because that is how I got diagnosed, is I got just put on antidepressants. The first time I said, I'm feeling really, really low. Got put on the antidepressants. And they put me into a psychotic episode, because that's what they do if you're bipolar.
Yeah.
So even with the family background, they're just like, here you go. So I can, yeah, I'm glad that you had that.
Yeah.
But I don't think she went into too much detail about the long-term effects of medication in this book, which I think was my problem with Marbles. So in Marbles, there's a lot of discussion about how many different medications the author tried and how many different side effects there were and why she stopped taking them and going back on them. Whereas in this one, I feel she was much more positive about lithium.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm not a doctor or anything, so I won't get into too much depth about lithium. But she had a nice balance of it's not for everybody. Also mixed in with, but it works for me and I fully support treatment.
Yeah.
Did you think that you learned anything about the treatment of bipolar from it?
Oh, for sure. Like, I didn't even know lithium was a thing that we treated or how it treated it or any of the side effects. Like, I knew there was treatment, but I like completely ignorant on that front. And so I really liked her discussion of being like, I didn't want to take these. I did not want to do it, but I could not afford not to. It was life or death. Like that, they were my options. But the medication wouldn't work without her amazing therapist. And therapy wouldn't have worked without her medication. And her doing that, being like, you have to find the thing that works for you. This is what's working for me, and it's great. And I think that's really important for anyone with a mental illness to be able to take away from and realize that it is such an individual journey. Things are not going to work for you that work for other people, and it's just trial and error to find those right things and hopefully getting to it in the right time.
Yeah. I think one of the I don't know whether it's a criticism of the book or something that people have brought up about this book is she was in quite a privileged position to have the knowledge and to have the access to that treatment, because obviously in America it's really, really, really expensive. I don't know anything about the Australian healthcare system, but
we're pretty chill.
But when I have seen how much just the lithium costs, let alone all the other medication that you have to counteract the lithium in your system, it gets hella expensive. And she seemed to have the luxury of, obviously she had a really well-paying job, so she was able to afford it. She had her healthcare because of her job, so she was able to afford it. She also had the knowledge that other things will work for her. She had access to a lot of really renowned therapists that she could call and get that help.
Just be like, sup.
How do you think she discussed that in the book? Because I think I quite like that she was quite open and honest and upfront about how lucky and privileged she was to have that.
Yeah, I definitely think it's not something that she's like, I'm a privileged white bitch. But she does acknowledge the fact that she had an amazing support network, that she worked hard for a job to be in the field that she was in to then be surrounded by experts in their field on the topic that she was dealing with. So I think she mentioned it, could have been a little bit more like, I was very privileged, but I remember her mentioning quite a few times that she was in a lucky position, that she was lucky for where she's at. And for me, I'm like, but were you though? Wasn't it, you know, having a military dad, so having an upbringing that would have supported you to go far, that you could manage to get into these amazing colleges, that you could be in this field? Like, yes, there's an element of luck, but there's also, this is your privilege. But I think she did it pretty well.
I feel like there was a lot of touching on subjects and not quite going into them. And I think maybe this is why I thought maybe I had an abridged version of the audiobook. For people who are watching, because I just realised we had this conversation off screen, I listened to an audiobook which was about 3 hours long, and I was not convinced it was the full audiobook because it's 200 pages. I think we've established it was the full book. It was just read very quickly. But it starts off with her talking about her military upbringing, but it doesn't go into any real depth about anything. It kind of just, like you were saying, it briefly mentions, I was lucky, but it doesn't go into, because I feel like a military environment could be quite damaging to somebody's mental health.
Oh, for sure.
But she never goes into it. She never discusses it. And then when she goes into her education, she talks about how her bipolar disorder affected her studies and made it really difficult. But again, it never went deeper than that. She kind of told us about, this year was really difficult, but I passed with flying colours. She didn't go into it. And as somebody who, I was diagnosed in my second year of my undergraduate degree, it has been a hellfire, like the second half of my master's. Like, I've nearly quit so many times. And if I just pass, I will be so happy, let alone get onto a PhD program. It just almost feels like she's aware that, like I said, she's aware that she's lucky. But I don't think she's aware of how lucky she is and doesn't go into that enough.
I've just found the section that I was thinking of when we were talking on this. But then back on Lithium and rotating on the planet at the same pace as everyone else, you find your credit is decimated, your mortification complete. Mania is not a luxury one can easily afford. It is devastating to have the illness and aggravating to have to pay for medications, blood tests, and psychotherapy. They, at least, are partially deductible. But money spent while manic doesn't fit into the Internal Revenue Service concept of medical expense or business loss. So after mania, when most depressed, you're given an excellent reason to be so. So it's like, they're partly deductible. Like, I understand your point and I fully acknowledge it, but it's the touching in that she has got that privilege to be able, it's a luxury, not one can't easily afford.
Yeah. And it's again touching on that, when you're manic, you spend so much money that you don't have. But she never talks about not having the money or going into debt or how that affected her. She just seems to have always been okay. And maybe that isn't the case, but that's not what she's written about. She hasn't written about how her mania put her into masses of debt and she'd spent years getting out of that. She just always seemed to be okay.
I love that the next section is, having a PhD in economics from Harvard in no way prepared my brother for the sprawling financial mess he saw on the floor in front of him. Like, it's just like, I've got my brother, here's my support network, he's got an economics degree from Harvard, we're fine.
Yeah, they're clearly very privileged and it doesn't go any further than that. So that's the next thing I was going to talk about then, is the relationship, starting with the family, because like you just mentioned, her family was her support network, her brother was her support network. Her father really intrigued me though, because she talks about her father. She never diagnoses him in the
No.
text, but I read it as he was potentially undiagnosed bipolar. Yeah, that's how it
Same.
came across.
Yeah. I think it was the hinting, like, this the gene where I got it from, because he's like, when she's first describing him having all these flights of fancies and just being this like amazing, bright, bubbly, interactive person, and then as they get older his moods become darker and he's turning to alcohol and all of that. So it's definitely like pitched as this is an experience without actually saying.
Did you feel like at any point she was going to go into the genealogy of it? Because that's something I kind of expected and we didn't get.
I would have liked it too, because I'm just fascinated in genealogy as itself. But yeah, when she started talking about it, she was a little bit evasive with it, so I thought maybe not, because she didn't want, like, I think she's still dealing with, in 1995 when this was written, she was still dealing with a lot of guilt that she's caused her family, and I think she didn't want to hurt them anymore by bringing their things into it.
Mm-hmm.
It's her memoir, not her family's, so I think she just wanted to sort of keep that for them. And so she didn't go into the genealogy because she was like, I don't want to acknowledge that this is my dad's or my sister's experience. It's just been, this is my experience. I've dealt with them. This is with the capacity that they were in. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. Now that's a way of thinking about it I hadn't thought of. But I think what I was getting at is more, I read everywhere and psychiatrists tell me all the time, it's genetic. But where's the gene?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
like, I thought maybe she would mention about, because you can't get a blood test for it.
No.
So why is there so much, I mean, this isn't really part of this discussion because it's not in the book, but, you know, why is there so much adamance that it is genetic when the evidence has never really been out there?
Yeah.
Anyway, so other than the family, we agree that she was kind of trying to protect the family, so I didn't want to go into that too much. What about her romantic relationships? Because this is a part that I really struggle with, and friendships as well, is that ability to maintain relationships. And I found it quite interesting when she talked about separating from her first husband. At one point, she moved back in, but she realised there was no chance of reconciliation because of what her illness had done to the relationship. What did you get from that section?
That was like, it was interesting because when I was reading it, I was like, this is the experience that she's had with her illness, but there would have been other contributing factors to the relationship. No relation just breaks down because of an illness. Like, there's usually a lot of other factors into it. So, like, I can understand the episode being the straw that broke the camel's back. I can completely understand that. But I'd feel like there would have been a lot of lack of communication leading up to it as well, or not being 100% to begin with, and then it's just aggravated by different episodes. And because he sounded really like chill, like he seemed like, nothing bothers me, I'm just laid back doing my thing, I'll calm you down, we're all good. Like, but I couldn't imagine like being someone that's constantly like, either based off how she described it, being all 100 miles an hour and like go, let's do life, this is amazing, everything's glorious, with a chill personality. Like, I can't see that being a supportive relationship, I suppose, because he'd just be like, I just want to chill. Like,
because I think this is another area where I don't think she went into enough detail. And I completely understand not wanting to go into painful details about your own relationships in your memoir. But I feel like when you're talking about that in a memoir that is about bipolar, talking about how the bipolar affects the relationship is really important.
Yeah. And she's got the science behind it to put it in a like very just clear-cut manner, and being able to disassociate from that. She could go into the clinical terms and be like, oh, in science, we can see that this does this, this, and this. If you don't want to go into your own personal experience, she has that to rely on.
Because in my experience, it's very hard to maintain relationships when manic, because how I would describe it is you are a different person. I am a different person, and I will just do things that people would never think of me. I can be horrible because the people around me might be really, really supportive. But if they tell me that they're concerned, and this is when I am manic, if they tell me they're concerned or that I shouldn't do something or shouldn't behave in a certain way, I will then turn against that person and be really angry at them for ruining my fun.
Right.
And then that just causes, it's a ripple effect then. And I've got really good at managing that over the last 3 years. But I would say about 3-4 years ago, I could ruin a relationship like that. And overnight, we'd not be friends anymore. Right. So I think I can see why actually it might be the illness that is the main factor of that, because like I said, you become horrible, absolutely horrible. And nobody has to forgive you just because you were unwell at the time, because you can control that. And for me, it was alcohol. Alcohol was that thing where my friends would maybe say, stop, you've had a bit too much. And I would switch, because in my head, I'm happy. I'm like, but this is me being happy. You're trying to ruin my fun. You don't want me to be happy. And I would say nasty things that I would never even, like, I didn't even think them. So I couldn't imagine why I'd said them. And I think sometimes they're unforgivable things. And it's not somebody else's responsibility to look after you and to be the one who monitors your behavior. Like, they can support you, but they can't tell you off. They can't stop you doing something.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So again, I think it's one of those things where she kind of hinted at,
but didn't. Yeah. There was a lot of dabbling, not a lot of deep diving.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's maybe why it's such a short book, because she wanted, rather than focusing on some specifics, she just wanted to mention a bit of everything.
She's just saying her experiences over time, but not really. She's just saying the experiences. Mm-hmm. She's not analyzing them or deep diving into them and behind them.
Yeah. And maybe that's a fault with the marketing of the book, because the book is marketed as being a life of bipolar from someone who knows the science.
Yeah.
So you expect it to be a bit more in depth,
definitely.
Maybe a circumstance in her life, and then analyze it a little bit. But that's not the book.
But no, yeah. I find it, that's a really interesting dichotomy between the marketing that we go in thinking it's going to be, and then what she actually wants to talk about and go through.
I always think when I'm talking about these books, like the discussions always come across quite negative, even though I'm saying I like the book. The representation in this book was good, which is a question we'll come on to later for me. But I feel like I'm being very critical of it. But what I did like about it, and something I really related to, is one of her other partners passes away suddenly. And she talks about her grief in that and how it didn't trigger an episode, either depressive or manic. When she mentioned that, because I feel like when she was talking about it, she was shocked she didn't go into one. How did you respond to that?
My heart was breaking for her. But yeah, I think that was a particular point, because she ended up traveling back to,
The
because
UK.
he was, yeah. And then so she goes and travels and sort of just lets herself grieve. I think, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I think maybe because she said she was so in shock that she couldn't respond in any way. But for me, grief is sort of in that lower sort of emotional feelings. So I don't know. I was conflicted by it.
Because what I got from it was this was where she was talking about sometimes, you're not always triggered.
Yeah.
It's not always a case of if you're depressed, it's because some things happened.
Yeah.
Because sometimes things can happen and you're fine.
You're fine. Yeah. You just.
And I think, again, coming from having lived with bipolar disorder, I had a conversation with somebody recently about how death doesn't really affect me.
Right.
And about feeling quite cold to it because it's a fact of life. People have to die. And yes, I'm not saying I don't grieve somebody, because of course I do. Yeah. But I don't get depressed about that.
Yeah.
It's not something that sends me really, really low, because I think it's kind of rationalized. Whereas I find things like breakups, for example, really, really difficult because it's an intangible thing. That person is still out there. They've just chosen not to be with you, or you've chosen not to be with them, and for whatever reason that person is no longer in your life when they could have been, kind of thing.
Yeah, I fully, yeah.
Because that's a more complex emotion, it's harder to deal with having bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe that's what she was trying to get there, because she talked about how difficult it was to separate from her partner, but then her husband. But then when her partner passed away, yes, she was sad, but things moved on.
Yes. Yeah.
And she was also very lucky to have very understanding partners who were just like, tell me about your bipolar. Let's deal with this.
Let's just,
Yeah, I was quite jealous.
I'm a medical professional. I can understand. Give me all like your symptoms and all everything, and we'll be fine.
Yeah.
That I thought, I was like, gee. You know what it told me though? I'm so thankful that men like that exist. But yeah, like I think could also be a little bit of her wanting to give a bit of positivity as well. Mm-hmm. Like, you can go through these trialing times, and sometimes you're not going to break. You're going to be okay, and you're going to get through it, and you're just going to grieve. You're going to go traveling to the UK for however long, a sabbatical, and just you'll be okay. And I think that was a nice area, considering you could still see that she was grieving him. Mm-hmm. Like that, I don't think that grief has ever left her. Mm-hmm. But like you said, it's not something that has triggered her into a spiral. She was just like, I'm just very sad. Mm-hmm. This was very sudden. What the hell happened?
Yeah, and I feel like this was the person she believed she was going to have children with.
Yeah, which they had the whole plan.
Yeah, and that discussion broke my heart. So this is getting into the last few questions that I had on the sheet, and then if you had any others, obviously we can discuss them. But something that I really liked about this, and is very different from my experience actually, is her psychiatrist? I can't remember who it was, discussing with her about children and telling her she shouldn't have children.
I wanted to neck him.
And this was, I think she said this was her biggest regret, is that she never had her own children, and that she had amazing nieces and nephews, but she'd always wanted to be a mother. And something I like, again, talking from my own experience, is one of the reasons I've never been on medication is partly because I don't want to be on medication, but partly because my doctor, when I was the age I was, 19, was, they were saying, look, we don't want to put you on medication because it will affect your fertility.
Right.
And I was never asked about if I wanted kids. But the assumption was, you will want to have kids one day because you're a young woman. So we're not going to deter that from you. Whereas hers was, you have bipolar disorder, so you shouldn't have kids. How did you respond to that? Because she was obviously pissed.
Yeah. I I wanted to punch the psychiatrist in the face. And the fact that, like, he just didn't listen to her, and she was like, oh, it hurt, because I think coming from a person that has wanted kids my entire life, I was like, I've always been, I want to be a mum. That's what I want to be in life. And then I taught for a year, and now I don't want kids. But I still have that feeling of when you do want to be that parent and someone turning around to you and being like, you are unfit to raise children. I was like, God damn, you don't know what she's capable of. Yes, she has this mental illness. And again, but there's no science for the gene. Like, they refer to it all the thing, but there's no science. So, like,
yeah. What I keep coming back to as well. So she mentioned in it that she asked the psychiatrist, are you saying I'll be an unfit mum?
Yeah.
And their response was, it's genetic. And I mean, there's so much you could go into about disability in general with that, but yeah, like, where is this gene? Again, I don't want to go into that too much because it's a conversation I'm definitely not qualified for. But it's just one of those where it does raise the question of, should people with bipolar have kids? Yes, if they want to, absolutely. What a stupid question. But then she goes on to discuss, well, hang on, should people with bipolar treat people with mental illness? Should people with a mental illness be allowed to work in the mental health field, in the psychology field? And I have thoughts on that. Like, personally, I'm like, they're probably better. They're probably better than the doctor who's never experienced mental health and just tells you to get some fresh air and go for a walk. And how do you do that when you're so depressed you literally don't want to wake up in the morning, Like, whereas somebody who has lived with that, I mean, I've noticed a massive difference between my doctors and my psychiatrists who have lived experience. And, my therapist that I had for 3 years had mental health issues. Like, I don't like the word issues, but, she had her own experience, and she would discuss that in sessions, which was a lot more helpful than the I'm going to say it, the middle-aged white man who would just sit there and go, and how do you feel about that? Have you tried drinking water?
Have you tried getting 8 hours of sleep? Oh, insomnia is a thing. So, like, I try, but there's only 24 hours in a day.
Yeah, who'd have thought that sleep would cure my insomnia? Oh, hang on. That's like literally the symptom of it. I'm coming to you because I can't sleep. Mm-hmm. Have you tried sleeping? Yes, I want to.
This is why I'm here seeking medical advice. Oh, my Lord. Yeah.
I think that's something that she's wrote a lot of papers on about as well. I've not read them, but I know that she's quite well known for talking about who should and shouldn't treat. I mean, she doesn't say anyone shouldn't, but who should treat mental illness.
I mean, there are some medical practitioners that probably shouldn't.
Oh no, yeah. If you go to feeling suicidal, and they shouldn't go, you're not going to kill yourself.
It's fine.
You should lose your license. No. That's everything I think I had on my list of questions. Was there any thoughts that you had that we haven't touched on?
For my edition, the Picador Classic, it has an introduction by Andrew Solomon. And I did my undergrad degree as anthropology. And I watched a TED talk on him, and he talks about depression. And I just wanted to mention it because it's so interesting. And I found it really interesting that they chose him to comment on the forward, because he talks in his TED talk. He worked in, I think it was Ghana, and there was mass genocide thing that occurred, really traumatic. And so Westerners decided to go in and help. And he was talking to the tribes leader of this place, and he was like, yeah, these white guys came in and they put everyone in locked, closed rooms, and they were isolated from the community, and they made them talk about the problems. There was no singing, there was no dancing, there was no sunlight, there was no community. So we had to ask them to leave. And so I found that really interesting, that Andrew was commenting on someone that was a Western clinician and so heavy in the medical field, when his experiences and discussions are that Western practices aren't always the best practices for different people, depending on the circumstances. So yeah, that was just a little side tidbit.
I didn't have that introduction in the audiobook, and I've not heard of this chap on TED Talk, but I will definitely.
He's really funny.
Is it on YouTube?
Yeah.
What I'll do then is, if I find it, I'll put the link in the description.
I'll send it to you on Instagram as well.
Thank you.
But yeah, it was just funny because it got me. I was in the headset of Western medicine's not always the best practice for everyone. And I think whilst Kay is heavily dependent on Western with psychotherapy and medication, and that works for her, I was already going in with, this isn't a one size fits all, because knowing Andrew Solomon and that experience. So yeah.
I think bipolar in particular is one of those where it's not once, like, there's the amount of medication that you have to try to get the right thing. And again, not a doctor, talking from my own experience, but like when they change your medication, so if you're on like normal antidepressants of like 20 milligrams, like they can up that to 30 or 40 or 50, no problem. When it's bipolar medication, it's literally 1 milligram at a time. Sometimes it's like half a milligram. It's like so specific, and they have to, like they always say, we're not going to get it right the first time, and it is a journey. Another reason why, no, I don't want to have 6 months where I don't know if I can function the next day. So yeah, I knew that going into it, it wasn't going to be a one size fits all. And I think she also mentions it's not a one size fits all, but I wish she would have talked about it more. Again, I think that's what I keep coming back to, is I just wanted a little bit more depth.
Yeah.
That I didn't quite get. But
overall, it was a really interesting look, but it was just a glimpse, we didn't go behind the curtains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I feel about it. So, normally I'd open it up to questions, but we don't really get many. So Kieran's in the comments. If Kieran has any questions, he can ask them. But other than that, let's just do some housekeeping. I've just announced the next few books in the series, in the book club. So book for May, because if you can't tell by the boxes behind me, May is chaotic. I'm moving. So I've gone for a poetry collection, which is I Would Leave Myself If I Could by Halsey. I need a co-host, so if anybody wants to co-host, let me know. June is How to Travel Light by Srivatsa Navatia. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, unfortunately, which is another memoir, but it's going to be the last memoir that we do for a while, because there's been a lot of memoirs, and that is about a male living with bipolar. He's a male Indian, so that one I think will be really interesting. In July, we have This Train is Being Held, which is a young adult contemporary novel, which is a retelling of West Side Story, in which one of the main characters, I think siblings, lives with bipolar disorder, and I think their mum also has mental illness of some description. That one sounds fascinating to me, and I can't wait to get to it. That one, I think Caris is going to co-host with me. And then in August, we're having the Bipolar Queen, which is Carrie Fisher, who is just one of my favourite people, the person who helped me come to terms with my own diagnosis, but is very problematic. So will be very interesting to discuss. And I do have a question from Kieran. Let's have a look. I would love to know what one topic discussion would you have liked the author to explore that was not present in the book? I actually do. Hypersexuality. I have not come across hypersexuality much in the books yet, and I can understand why, because I think it's the part of bipolar disorder that has a lot of shame attached to it. She doesn't even talk about substance use that much. But in particular, hypersexuality, there is a book coming up, How to Travel Light, talks a lot about hypersexuality, but it is that part of bipolar disorder that I think a lot of people who live with bipolar disorder, and I don't like any of the terminology to describe this, sleep around, come away from it with a lot of shame. And I think that's why it's not talked about. But it should be, because it's a thing. And I think we need, this book club is all about destigmatizing bipolar disorder, the symptoms around it, the experience of it. So that is something, we all know that destigmatizing, can only be done by talking about it. So we need to talk about the hypersexuality, so that people don't just hide away and feel like they're, sluts.
I feel like Kay very, very one sentence touched on it, in terms of the fact that she would just go and have many partners and not really worry about the consequences of that. But aside from that, there was nothing else.
No.
Because she had 3 main stable partners. So I think that played into itself.
Yeah. And I do think it's something that is more common in younger people. And I think maybe people who don't necessarily have a diagnosis yet and just think this is what you do when you're young and having fun.
Yeah.
But again, the book that we're reading in June does talk about this. So I'm excited. I just wish it wasn't from a male point of view, because I feel like that's stereotypical. Yes, men sleeping around. Woo. But yeah, that's something that just hasn't been in any of the books really. But it is in Carrie Fisher's books. So yeah. But I think we can wrap it up now, unless you got anything else you want to say? Any finishing thoughts?
I'm all good. I've really enjoyed being able to discuss this and see your experiences and sort of how you felt towards it, because I was very much I enjoyed this experience, but I don't know how well it was for representation and all of that. So thank you.
Oh yeah, that was the final thing to finish on then. Representation, I think, was fantastic. It's harder to talk about representation when it's a memoir, because this is somebody who actually lived with it. We've obviously mentioned some of the language used at times could be a bit, it's not even stigmatizing, because it just took me aback.
Yeah, and I think in today's generation, talking about mental illness, we just consider it rude. You just wouldn't say that to someone because it's disrespectful.
Yeah. Oh, well, a lot of people do.
Yeah, I know they still do, and they're dickheads.
Yeah.
But even when we were talking about it, I would say she was having a psychotic episode. I could not bring myself to say, because I just don't feel that that's okay if people feel uncomfortable with it. I don't want to be continuing to perpetuate that. So yeah, because I know how uncomfortable being called the horrible things that you know, and so yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, Paige, for joining. Go and subscribe to Paige's channel, Pages with Paige. I'll leave a link in the description, which I need to edit because I'm useless.
I'll find the TED Talk.
And we'll leave the TED Talk down there as well. It is ridiculous o'clock on both ends. It's 11 o'clock for me in the evening. It's 8 a.m. for you now, is it, Paige?
Yep.
So, yeah, early and late for both of us. So we're going to go. I'm going to sleep. And thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.